sister, you've been on my mind, sister. We're two of a kind, my sister. I'm keeping my eye on you. I bet you think I don't know nothing but singing the blues, sister. Have I got news for you? I'm something. I hope you think that you're something too. Scuffling, I've been up that lonesome road, and I've seen a lot of suns going down. Oh, but trust me, no low life's gonna run me around. So let me tell you something, sister. Remember your name, no twister. Steal your stuff away, my sister. Sure ain't got a whole lot of time. So come on, shake your shimmy, sister. 'Cause your sister's feeling fine. Scuffling, I've been up that lonesome road, and I've seen a lot of suns going down. But just trust me, no low life's gonna run me around. So let me tell you something, sister. Remember your name. There's no twister. And steal your stuff away, my sister.
It's great to welcome you back from the break. My name is Antoinette van der Merwe, and I'll be chairing Breakaway 1, Session 6A, Resources for the Implementation of the Language Policy Framework. I'm Antoinette van der Merwe, Senior Director, Learning and Teaching Enhancement at Stellenbosch University. And this morning it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Prof. Duresh Ramjagunath, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Learning and Teaching at Stellenbosch University. He will be introducing the session by providing some general remarks on the resources required to successfully implement the new language policy framework for public higher education institutions. Prof. Ramjagunath, over to you.
Good morning, Dr. van der Merwe, and thanks very much for the introduction. Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my great pleasure to make a few introductory remarks before we have some distinguished speakers reflect on the resource implications of the language policy framework. During the course of yesterday, we heard from various speakers about the purpose of the language policy framework in higher education and all of the laudable aims and objectives that it hopes to achieve. What you also heard, directly or indirectly, is that the success of the policy framework is going to be highly dependent on the individual institutional language policies, and more importantly, on their implementation plans. Now, we are all intimately aware of the challenges that we have faced in the higher education sector over the last decade. The sector is working within significant constraints, the two biggest issues, in my opinion, being human resources and funding. If institutions are to fully deliver on the laudable aims and objectives of the language policy framework, it now must be achieved within the current resource constraints, and in the majority of cases, in competition with priorities that are viewed as more significant and which are also possibly viewed as greater contributors to the academic standing and the financial sustainability of these institutions. Institutions would therefore have to make difficult resource allocation decisions about the extent to which they are reasonably practically able to implement on their language policies. Their policies may have all the best intentions and address all the purposes, aims, and objectives set out in the language policy framework for higher education, but be entirely lame in its implementation, not because of intent, but because of reasonably practicability. What is going to make implementation practicable is without doubt a significant fresh injection of resources, most notably funding. You would notice me stating fresh injection of resources because it would not be feasible within an environment of adjusted or reprioritized resourcing. When one starts to seriously interrogate the resources required for the successful implementation of a progressive language policy, one quickly realizes the significance of trying to achieve this in a resource-constrained environment and sector. Whether we like it or not, the very units and centers that are meant to assist in the successful implementation of the language policies at our institutions have arguably over time been the ones which have been significantly resource cut due to changing institutional priorities within the budget constraints. Now, what I'm talking about, and just to give you some examples here, are about language centers and language departments, which assist with academic and professional literacies, and which offer credit-bearing courses in this regard, which enable students to bridge the gap between secondary and tertiary education, and offer courses in intercultural communication. They also offer services such as writing and reading laboratories. They offer language learning and communication courses for both local and international students and our staff. And they offer translation and editing services, language and communication design, terminology development, translation of things like podcast lecture materials, interpreting services, including sign language and braille, etc., etc. I think these are the very centers and units that are at risk at the moment, that are meant to be able to deliver with regards to our language framework policy. Now, I've listed this in some detail because at times I believe that our colleagues do not get an appreciation of the extent of resources and infrastructure required to effectively deliver on the intent to be a multilingual institution. The institutional cost of multilingualism can be significant. And if one considers the human resource aspects, implicit staff-related costs in both the professional affairs and support and academic environments, as well as all the intrinsic costs of translation of lecture materials, exam papers, reports, presentations, emails, etc., the actual cost, both direct and indirect, rapidly mounts up. It would not be unimaginable to, with some confidence, state that an institution that if it had to successfully deliver on full implementation of the language policy could spend between 1% to 5% of its budget in such an endeavor. Now, given the quantum of funding and resourcing required for effective implementation of the full intent of the language policy framework, it is appropriate that we have a comprehensive discussion on how we resource this endeavor. Inadequate resourcing of the implementation of the language policy framework would put higher education institutions in the difficult position of having to decide what is reasonably practicable and then be at odds with the intent of the framework policy. It is therefore fantastic that we have presentations in this session from Dr. Thandi Lewin, the Deputy Director General for Higher Education and Training, Professor Langa Khumalo, the Executive Director for the South African Center for Digital Language Resources, and Dr. Daniel Adams, the Chief Director in the Department of Science and Innovation. I'm hoping that we are going to hear some concrete recommendations and intent from the appropriate government departments as to how they are going to give effect to the proper implementation of the language policy framework. Resourcing is going to be key to realizing the full intentions of the policy and for effective implementation. Thanks very much.
Thank you for those introductory remarks, Prof. Ramajuganath. With that, we will now go over to Dr. Thandi Lewin, Deputy Director General, Department of Higher Education and Training, and she will provide some input on the strategies to harness funding for the implementation of the Department of Higher Education and Training's language framework. Welcome, Thandi. We look forward to hearing you speak. Thanks.
Thanks. Molweni, Dumelang, Sanibonani, Absheni, Nda. Good morning, goeiemorgen. I am going to present, just project my presentation. To get to the right place. There we go. Thanks very much for having us in this session. This has been an absolutely fascinating colloquium so far, and really helping us a lot as the department to think about some of the challenges of this policy framework and some of the really exciting work that's taking place in our institutions that we can build upon. Just in terms of, reflecting on the policy framework and its importance in the higher education sector and in the country, I think yesterday's sessions really gave us such a wonderful sense of some of these issues. We were reminded by Dr. Mabizela of the constitutional imperatives around language and the critical importance of building a democratic and inclusive society, the importance of redressing the past inequalities, and the importance of forging a new society built on constitutional values, and how critical language issues are as part of that project. The issues around social justice, also Prof. Bauer reminded us around this, and the issues of the development of this country and what it means in terms of language, issues of redress, also addressed in the Constitution and in the White Paper 3, the beautiful policy document that outlined our vision for a transformed higher education system back in 1997, but which still resonates very much with the work that we still need to do in our system. The importance of language as an issue that relates to identity and culture, the importance recognizing that South Africa is a multilingual and diverse society. A very small minority of South Africans are not multilingual and functionally multilingual. Also, some really interesting reflections on the higher education imperatives of the language policy and the need to really deal with access and success issues, so many challenges that we still face in our higher education system, the importance of teaching and learning and the development of language within teaching and learning, and also the idea that is referred to in many different ways and in many different discussions, but the idea of epistemic justice or epistemic injustice. And I'm quite struck by some of the philosophical discussions around this and how important it is. The philosopher Miranda Fricker writes about epistemic injustice and talks about two forms of epistemic injustice. One is testimonial and the other is hermeneutical. Testimonial injustice is when a prejudice causes a hearer to give a deflated level of credibility to this person who's speaking, to the word of a speaker. But hermeneutical injustice occurs at a prior stage when a gap in collective interpretive resources puts someone at an unfair advantage when it comes to making sense of their social experiences. And in many ways, the issue of language in higher education is something we need to face around hermeneutic injustice. And indeed, what she says is we might say that testimonial injustice is caused by prejudice in the economy of credibility, and that hermeneutical injustice is caused by structural prejudice in the economy of collective hermeneutical resources. And I think that that's something that we are really trying to deal with this policy. It's something that's being discussed quite deeply at this colloquium. That also the other important points that have been made around higher education and community, the idea of higher education and its publics that Prof. Bauer speaks about, and the need for higher education to be responsive to community, to the communities outside the universities, but also the communities of scholars and students that exist within the higher education system. Very important discussions around the transformation of knowledge itself. This is something that is referred to very strongly in our policy documents. It's something that students have raised. This was mentioned by Prof. Pakeng yesterday in the discussion around the roads must fall and related student movements that have raised these issues, the importance of knowledge being embedded in language. The issues around development of individual capabilities and aspirations of people, and how this links to our constitutional aspirations and the purpose of higher education that Sizwe Mabizela talked about so beautifully yesterday. Language as an issue of both inclusion and exclusion, and of course the issue of transformation of higher education itself. And I think going back to the Constitution and White Paper 3 is very important. The White Paper on PSET and the soon-to-be released National Plan on Post-School Education and Training, which also addresses the issue of the language policy framework and its implementation. The NDP, I think quite interestingly, is very weak on language itself and language, as part of the development of South African society, but it's very strong on the role of institutions and higher education institutions and the role that institutions play in the development of knowledge, in the education of young people, and in the transformation of society itself. So, in fact, when reading the NDP, I thought there'd be more about language, but that's why, in a sense, this policy framework is so important. And also, really, it's been very interesting to hear some of the responses from the sector on the policy framework, and quite exciting in a way that it's been received predominantly in such a positive way. We can talk about what might be some of the shortcomings and where it might need to change, but we can do that at a later stage. The reasons advanced, of course, for the revision of the policy framework were as follows. We're talking about the promotion of multilingualism without clear guidelines on how multilingualism is to be realized. This is something that was a big concern with the previous policy. There was a concern that we had a lack of any enforcement mechanism and very few consequences for non-compliance. Very little clear alignment with the curriculum and the language development at the basic education level. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that's happening there. An update of the language of the policy to align with new developments in the post-school education and training sector, which of course took place after 2010. There was also a lack of specifics on the language of teaching and learning and medium of instruction issue, and that was brought into the policy framework. But ultimately also a continued recognition, and this is ultimately one of the core focus areas of the policy, the continued marginalization of Indigenous African languages in higher education and concern about the weak focus on their development in and through higher education. And this is something that we've been talking about in depth over the last 2 days. The policy is embedded within the following principles: recognizing the linguistic and cultural diversity that exists at South African universities, the need for higher education to value all official languages as sources of knowledge, capable of informing learning of the different disciplines in higher education, a recognition that languages are critical resources in the transmission of knowledge, cognitive development, and effective participation in the knowledge economy, enhancing people-centeredness in addressing the interests, needs, and aspirations of a wide range of language communities through ongoing dialogue and debate, and the value of collaborative partnerships, and I'll come back to this, to promote multilingualism, as well as the stance against the use of any language for the purposes of exploitation, exclusion, domination, and discrimination, which is very much part of our past, particularly in higher education. This slide just shows the domain uses of the language, and it's drawn from the policy document, the focus on languages of learning and teaching, and of course, recognizing the de facto status of English as the primary language of learning and teaching across the system. But the policy does call upon universities to adopt a flexible approach in the implementation of English as the language of learning and teaching, and very clearly that support must be provided to students for whom English is not their first language or mother tongue, and this, of course, is the vast majority of our students. Scholarship, teaching and learning, and the development in the language plans and driven from language plans of universities of official languages into languages of teaching and learning, as well as languages of scholarship and research. And it's been really wonderful to see some of the initiatives that are taking place already in the sector, and just to see how far some of that has actually developed. And then, of course, the issue of communication and multilingualism in communication, and the perhaps slightly controversial in terms of resources, as Prof. de Villiers raised yesterday, the issue of conveying institutional communication in 2 official languages other than English. And this is something that we do need to discuss in terms of the implementation of the policy framework. So just to also, recognize that the policy framework creates multiple areas of work and impact in institutions, and there are very many areas that are impacted on by this policy framework. The one, of course, is recognizing and fostering the importance of multilingualism in universities, something that, may have been something quite shallow in the past, but not necessarily from some of the things that we're seeing now. But a very important part of the policy is fostering multilingualism and making sure that our universities reflect the multilingual diversity of our country in the way in which they operate. This links to communication internally, it links to external communication, it links to issues of institutional culture, and quite a lot of work obviously going on in this area. The issue of learning and teaching innovations and developments in the learning and teaching space, very, very exciting to see some of the work that's being done. Some of it's quite nascent, some of it's been going on for a long time, but very exciting to see changing practices and pedagogies. And obviously a very, very key driver in the policy is this is an area that needs to be continually developed and worked on in much more depth across the system. The issue of curriculum innovation, and also very gratifying to see the roles of centers for teaching and learning and the kind of specialist support that's being provided across institutions to faculty, to academics, and to different courses in developing curriculum innovations that deal with the language issue. So a lot of work there. The development of languages themselves, the African languages, the historically marginalized languages. This is recognized as an area that so many years into democracy we have not really been able to address. The importance of language teaching, and also the issue that Prof. Pakheng raised very sharply yesterday about the importance of teaching in languages themselves and the nature of that teaching of African languages. So very importantly, part of this is about having strong African language departments within our institutions across the system. And this is where the issue of collaboration becomes so important, because while we are ensuring that there's a development of languages across the system, it's not expected that at all institutions there would be emphasis on all the languages. Obviously, there are regional dimensions to this, but there's also the need for collaboration to ensure that across the system as a whole we have effective development, but not necessarily every institution having expertise in all the areas. There's a lot of work, of course, going on around terminology development, glossaries and dictionaries, and some very exciting work there, and obviously the kind of work that we'd want to sustain and build on. There's quite a significant focus on the teaching of African languages and programs in specific areas. We've heard about some of those in accounting. We've heard about some of those in health sciences, for example. We also have the Centers for African Language Teaching in some of our education faculties. Currently, we have 3 of those CALTs. We have one focusing on Sesotho and isiZulu at UJ. We have one on isiXhosa at UWC, working with some of the universities in the Eastern Cape. And we also have one on Setswana at Northwest University. And there is currently the development of a further CALT, which hopefully will be in place by 2023, focusing on Tshivenda, Xitsonga, Sepedi, and Siswati. Those CALTs have been funded through a grant on the Teaching and Learning Development Capacity Improvement Project, which is an EU-funded project. And so quite a significant amount of work going on strengthening the teaching of African languages, strengthening the teaching of reading in African languages, as well as the development of scholarship in African languages within the education sphere specifically. So work that can be built on there as well. And then, of course, the very critical issue of research development and innovation around research and the development of scholarship in languages and linguistics. So those are some of the areas that we think that the policy framework impacts upon. Now, just in terms of the implementation, and I know there have been a lot of questions about this, and there's a strong focus on what is the DHET doing, how are we going to facilitate this, how are we going to resource this. So just to indicate that we are exploring the possibility of a collaborative implementation strategy, and I stress that as being very important. This is not a government-only policy framework that will be implemented from the top. This is something that we have a shared responsibility for. In fact, it's not just an imperative of higher education, it's an imperative of our national policy frame, it's an imperative for our country, and therefore we need system-wide alignment. And we are going to have to work together, with USAF, with COPAL in particular, with the Teaching and Learning Strategy Group, quite likely also with the NIHSS, the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, which has a key focus on African languages. And so I just want to emphasize the need for that collaboration. I understand, of course, that also means that we need to engage with institutions on many levels in terms of the implementation. We are intending to establish and implement a funding model. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the one slide that does talk to resourcing. That will be enabling the implementation of the policy framework. We are working on providing project funding to support language development initiatives. But these will be based, of course, on language development plans, which will need to be submitted before funding can be available. We are working on the evaluation criteria for those plans, and will obviously involve a wider group than just the bureaucrats in the department in doing that. And of course, we also need to outline the implementation guidelines, which are under development at the current time. We will have to monitor the impact of the language policy to establish the extent to which the policy implementation is achieving its desired results. And universities will be required to report, of course, on this in terms of their language plans and strategies. This is something we need to look at in terms of the reporting regulations that are in existence. And the DHET will also have to develop a monitoring instrument with indicators. Ultimately, institutions are going to be responsible for preparing sufficient language teachers, interpreters, translators, and other language practitioners to serve the needs of our multilingual society, as they are doing. But this is an issue that we can't lose sight of over time. In terms of funding and resourcing, I've made this point that this is a national imperative, and therefore it does involve other departments other than the Department of Higher Education and Training. This is given the role of universities and the educational imperative for universities who are developing graduates for a transforming society. So there is no one funding source that will solve this problem, and there are very likely no magic solutions. And I think this has been referred to by the opening speaker, but the current fiscal situation is an extremely serious one. We are likely to be in that situation, particularly as a result of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on our country and on our economy for some time. And this means that our current fiscal situation will likely remain constrained for some time. However, what we do acknowledge is that there is a need for a purposeful and targeted approach to providing support for the implementation of the policy framework. And as the department, we are exploring what those funding modalities might look like. And I can't give too much detail on that right now, but it is something that we will be discussing with the sector, and it's something that we need to discuss quite seriously. Certainly, there is a need for national partnerships to give effect to the policy framework, and we will be looking to our sister government departments, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture in particular, the Department of Science and Innovation, and Dr. Adams is here and we'll talk a bit more about that, as well as structures like the PANSAL, the Pan-South African Language Board. So those are some of the areas we need to look at. Also, donor funding is a possibility. I was reminded by Prof. Mkize's presentation, of course, of the very important role that the SANTED project played. Unfortunately, of course, it's come to an end, but it did play a very critical role in supporting a number of institutions to develop in the area of language, multilingualism, as well as teaching and learning and incorporation of language issues there. So that was a very important project. Also, as I mentioned, this TLD-CIP, which is an EU-funded project, which is partly funding the development of these CALTs. But I do think that we need to quite proactively explore fundraising opportunities within the sector in order to support the effective implementation of this policy. What we are currently looking at is a collaborative grant through the University Capacity Development Program and the grant. The UCDP, of course, has a very specific set of focus areas around supporting student success, teaching and learning, curriculum development and innovation. So therefore, in line with the UCDP objectives, there are many aspects of the work that is being done and needs to be done in institutions that could be supported through a collaborative grant. The reason why it should be probably a collaborative grant, although obviously institutions would need to receive their individualized funds to support this, is that we do need to ensure that we're building strength in all languages at a system level. And we also need to coordinate this collaborative work and the support for individual universities at a collaborative level to ensure that we're not duplicating work, to ensure that we are covering all the languages effectively. And of course, there is going to be a requirement that universities use their own funding as part of the developments in teaching and learning and research and other core aspects of the university. So this is something that I think is very important. This colloquium is forcing us to begin to put some of these ideas down and to talk about them and what they mean. And no doubt there are lots of questions on this issue. So just in conclusion then, collaboration across the university sector is going to be absolutely critical, and I think we're going to have to work at a system level with COPAL, with the NIHSS, with USAF, with the institutions to ensure that we're effectively developing all languages and to ensure that we're not limit the duplication that's going on. Of course, some of the work that we've seen already is helping this. If you look at the fact that a lot of the materials that have been developed and a lot of the ideas that have been developed are being shared in fora like this. A lot of stuff is available as open source. If we can continue in that way, we will really be able to affect the system at a broader level. Obviously, the issue of leadership at the highest level has been mentioned, and I think that's what's so important about this colloquium, that there is such high-level leadership on this issue, and that this is a matter that the highest leadership of our institutions are taking very seriously and participating in this discussion. So I think, in a way, we are already quite far down the line in terms of that, and it's really very exciting to see that there's such a commitment to addressing this issue and to debating and grappling with what it means for all of us. I think we are looking at multiple resourcing and funding possibilities. I don't think that, you know, the fiscus is going to be able to fund everything, but again, the department on its own is not going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve with this policy framework. So we do need to explore multiple possibilities there. I've talked about the national imperative of partnerships and growing the work over time. I think we can see there's been a massive development in the system over time, but this is something that we are going to have to grow slowly. And we hope that we can provide some stimulus from departmental funding with support from other government departments. We are going to need to demonstrate solid progress over time and therefore show incremental developments in line with the funding availability. And this is something that we're going to have to debate and discuss in terms of priorities and in terms of really meaningfully progressing the goals of the policy. Communication practices similarly and policies will develop over time, of course, as resources become available. The importance of monitoring is going to be a big discussion, and the sharing of good practices and resources, which is in part what's happening here today. Certainly the department has a role in stimulating this work, providing the guidelines and some financial support, as well as providing an oversight of policy implementation, realistic oversight of policy implementation. And then I've already talked about some of the partnerships that we need to look at, and an issue that we will obviously have to look at going forward around quality assurance and the role of the CHE, but also how we really think about language development and the oversight of the developments there. And then just to end, I wanted to say, kufanele sikwenze lokhu. It's my attempt to say we must do this. And then siyabonga.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruin, for that input. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Langa Khumalo, and he's going to be speaking on computational resources for the implementation of the new language policy framework for public higher education institutions. And Prof. Khumalo is the Executive Director of SADILAR and also at Northwest University, and also wears another hat as chairperson of COPOL, Yusuf's Community of Practice for African Languages. Over to you, Professor Khumalo. Professor Khumalo, you just have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Prof. Khumalo, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there's just a feedback coming through. So I think there's another microphone on. For a brief moment, we could see your slides, but I can't see your slides anymore. I just see your video feed coming through. So maybe just to share your slides again. There we go. I can see your slides. I can see you, and I just heard you speaking as well.
Okay. I hope you can hear me well now.
Much better. Thank you very much. Perfect.
What I'm going to attempt to do is to introduce a national research infrastructure by the name SADILAR, which is the South African Center for Digital Language Resources. And I'm hoping that I'm going to quickly show to you that SADILAR can actually be used as one of the national infrastructures to address what we are grappling with here, i.e. finding the necessary resources that are required to implement the framework. So I'm going to quickly touch on the 7 areas, i.e. what in brief SADILA is, its mandate, the resources that it has, and sharing these resources and how these are going to be monitored and evaluated. So I'm going to present the unique research infrastructure, and I'm going to show that this research infrastructure can provide strategic resources for supporting the framework. And I will show that some of the resources required to implement the framework actually reside in the research infrastructure. And I will also try and show that its mandate fits the requirement of a national strategy to address the challenges of all the 26 public institutions, and also how the strategy can actually be used to fully implement the framework. So what is SADILA? SADILA is one of the 13 research infrastructures of the Department of Science and Innovation in what is called the South African Research Infrastructure Roadmap. And SADILA is hosted at Northwest University and is funded by the Department of Science and Innovation. Its hub, which is the center, is linked to various nodes that assist in the development, research, and support of all the official languages in the country. SADILA is the first of such a center in the continent, and indeed mirrors the Clarin European infrastructure in Europe. SADILA has a broad mandate to develop all the 11 official languages, as I am going to try and iterate in my presentation. So SADILA derives its mandate from the Constitution, and the Constitution mandates that all the 11 official languages must be developed in order to achieve parity of esteem between them. There has been varying attempts to develop human language technologies and natural language processing tools for the 11 official languages, and these have been in place since the turn of the century. These attempts have been driven at the universities of Pretoria, Stellenbosch University, Northwest University at CITEXT, and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR for short. However, they still remain under-resourced except for English. So the strategic function of SADILA is to create, manage, and distribute resources as well as applicable software to all South Africa's official languages in order to stimulate and support research and development in the humanities and social sciences. So SADILA has 2 main programs. The first is the digitization program, and is struggling the digital humanities program. And the digitization program involves the creation of relevant text, speech, and multimodal resources for the research and development of South Africa's 11 official languages. And DH is driving the development of the required capacity to teach humanities and social sciences in a novel and new way. And I'm going to talk about the programs that actually sit within the second leg of our function. So the overall vision of SADILA is to stimulate and enable digital research and development in South Africa's 11 official languages, to cultivate and grow the digital humanities scholarship in South Africa and indeed in the continent, while creating strategic synergies with local and international partners with similar or complementary infrastructure. So SADILA follows what has become now the hub and spoke model. The hub being the Northwest University in Potchefstroom, where the center is, and the spoke being the critical focus areas that are specialized, and we call them the specialization nodes. And these are the University of Pretoria, that is focusing on the digitization part of SADILA's work, University of South Africa, that is focusing on semantics and terminology, and a cohort of universities forming what is called ISELDA, developing language tools for teaching and learning, and CSIR developing speech technologies, while CTEXT at Northwest University developing text resources, and Stellenbosch University being our newest node developing child language research. So the projects that are linked to each of these nodes are the digitization text resources and other multimodal resources at University of Victoria, terminology development and scientific wordness that are critical in semantics and semantic studies. And these are very useful in the lexicon development and so on, are actually driven by our node at UNISA. Learner corpora for academic writing and developing writing resources. And these writing resources are being shared with our COPAL so that our experts in the teaching and learning of African languages can actually use these learner resources developed by our ISELDA node. And the CSIR node is describing transcribed speech corpora and automated speech collection, while the annotated text corpus creation and machine learning synthesis is developed by our CTEXT node. Child language is the forte of our Stellenbosch University node. So in terms of managing these resources, a lot of these resources that are being developed that are necessary for the intellectualization of African languages, they are actually long-term digital preservation and legal distribution resources. Again, because we are a research infrastructure, we follow scientific protocols, and because of those protocols that are actually very well developed, we are actually a B center status of a European infrastructure called Clarion. So we have open source as far as possible for most of our resources that sit in our repository, and we have data repository that include indices for these resources, downloads for certain resources, and you can actually go to our resource catalog, and there's a drop-down menu, and you can access many of our resources that sit in that portal. Persistent identifiers for long-term accessibility and referencing, and of course, the standardized metadata. Technology portals are also there for simple online access to language technologies, and these are actually available at the click of a button for any person who is actually teaching any African language and they want to teach it online or digitally, and or actually want to crowdsource data online in order to teach or to support evidence for teaching their course, their language course. So this is actually a very useful technology, and Sadila is available to actually provide support for upskilling and or reskilling the professoriate in this regard. And we do have support for addressing legal issues related to data resources. And we know that universities are generating a lot of data, and some of them are developing technologies, and they need support on the protocols that are required to put in place in order to support these resources. Sadila also drives what is called research support and also training. We are training the professoriate on the resources that we have. We're training the professoriate on the resources that they are currently developing. And Prof. Rab Jagannath made a very important point, that is the absence of the required skills or expertise. And we know that some universities do not actually have the capacity to develop what is required to intellectualize an African language. And Sadila does provide skills or reskilling programs to everyone in the humanities and social science area in order for them to actually acquire these skills. So awareness of available resources and research methodologies are part of our drive. Demonstrator projects, we do that to the professoriate, and we provide support for training. We train professoriate in HSS, train visiting scholars. We do workshops on a lot of these programs that I actually made reference to, particularly the Voyant for text processing and ELAN programs. We have actually a flagship project that we launched late last year in December and is underway this year, the Escalator Project. The Escalator Project is designed to address a lot of things. We're targeting what is called the historically disadvantaged universities to develop communities of practice for people that can actually work easily in the computational and or digital space. And this requires a carefully crafted program that we are outlaying throughout the academy. And we have two flagship programs, the Empower track that actually is focusing on a specific demographics in our population, i.e. developing resources for, the skills and digital skills or computational skills for targeted women groups that are interested in this area. And this is important because these resources are absent. And I call them resources because expertise is a resource. They are absent in our universities, and some of these technologies that are required for the intellectualization of African languages cannot be developed because these skills are absent. And actually, I can give you a very quick window there on the various tracks that we have on the escalator project, from the Explorer track to the Embarker track to the Enhancer track, the Enabler track, the Educator track, and the Special Empower track that is focusing on women scientists or human language practitioners that actually want to acquire digital or computational skills for working in this area, i.e. the area of developing resources, technical resources for the South African languages. SADILA, as I've said, has a lot of resources. So if you go to our website, you can actually go to the resources page and check our resource index, check our student data repository, check the technologies that are available, and of course the resource catalog. And this is the infrastructure that is in place currently. But there is more, because not only do we create, but we manage and distribute resources that are available at SADILA. And we want to present these as resources that can actually enable the implementation of this new framework, the resources that can be made available to the 26 public universities in this national research infrastructure that is actually, that can easily be linked to all the 26 universities as a center for actually facilitating the development and distribution of the resources that are required to intellectualize these languages for effective teaching and learning at our various universities. So how do we do that? So SADILA can actually have these shared digital language resources accessible by all the 26 public universities. The imperative do exist to have a comprehensive language resource audit. As you saw in the previous presentations, not just this morning, but yesterday, we have advances, albeit in pockets of our 26 public universities, of a lot of things that have been done, a lot of good things that have been done. But these things are actually sitting in these universities. Most of the universities can see what University X is doing or what University X has done, and they are replicating their efforts. So what SADILA can do as a national resource center is to actually coalesce this process of distribution of these resources. And we do have the capacity to do that. We do have the capacity to manage and distribute these resources. We do actually have the capacity, the expertise to actually see how well developed some of these tools are, and even provide the necessary expertise to elevate the functionality of some of the technologies that have been developed at these universities. So we actually can provide specialized infrastructure for specialized terminology or multimodal lexicons that are available not just at SADILA, but also are available at our universities and even some of our departments, especially the Department of Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, that is developing a lot of terminology. We have signed recently a memorandum of understanding with PANSAP that is also developing a lot of dictionaries, and SADILA has the infrastructure for dictionary, not just dictionary databases, but also the infrastructure to support lexical development, and also the distribution of the lexicons that are required for the teaching and learning in our various institutions. Language technologies, we've seen the spell checker that UKZN has developed for isiZulu, and that technology can actually be hosted and upgraded at SADILA, because SADILA has also developed, albeit using data sets that are limited because African languages do not have much of data sets available. And we can actually use these technologies to expand the functionality of their functionality across the academy. So we have spell checkers, we have grammar checkers, corpora that have been developed for African languages, again, albeit in small scale, can be valorized actually by using or leveraging on this national research infrastructure. The expertise that is available, SADILA has a professorial chair in digital humanities, so that capacity can be deployed to the academy and be made available centrally, so that universities actually can work with the expertise that we have at SADILA in order to support the implementation of the framework via resource development. We have, and I'm here focusing on this type of resources. I spoke about lexical resources, technology resources, the expertise that is required to develop and drive these resources. And of course, my colleague, Dr. Tandy, spoke about funding resources. These must be also made available, because without funding, there is nothing that can enable this very important task. So SADILA can actually fund the audit, which is, I think, is the first state of the art that we must establish. We must actually know what is being developed, at what level, at which university, so that when we have this comprehensive resource audit, we can then grow the strategy towards developing these resources that can actually effectively be accessed by the academy and drive the implementation of the framework. SADILA has various levels of monitoring and evaluation of its processes that are in place. The AFIC, the management committee, the steering committee that provides the strategic oversight to all our functions. And I hope in this very breakneck speed, because I knew I was chasing time, I was trying to make time so that I make life easy for the chair. I hope in this breakneck speed, I have actually showed that SADILA can, as a national research infrastructure, can actually provide the necessary resources in terms of technology, in terms of all the other resources, bar financial support and enable the new framework. Chair, thank you very much. I see you're smiling because I've done well in terms of time.
Thank you so much, Prof. Khumalo. Yes, in interest of time, I'm going to hand over immediately to Dr. Daniel Adams, Chief Director, Department of Science and Innovation, and he will talk on the DSI-funded research infrastructures as strategic centers in supporting the new language policy framework. Thank you, Dr. Adams. Over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, Chair. I will go straight ahead and share my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. I'll tell you when I can see your presentation.
Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see your presentation. Perfect. If you just put it on slideshow, then it would work. At the bottom where you were with the right below, then.
Let me just see it quickly. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Perfect. I can see it. Thank you very much.
All right, just 1 second. So good afternoon again, colleagues, to everybody in attendance at this colloquium. Thank you also to the organizers for inviting myself on behalf of the Department of Science and Innovation to be part of this very important event this afternoon. As indicated, my presentation will be focusing on the Department of Science and Innovation funded research infrastructures as strategic centers in supporting the new language policy framework. As an outline for my presentation, I will concentrate on these items that's displayed on my slide right here. To start with, it's important to probably join the discussions of yesterday and up to now in reflecting on the critical requirements for the successful implementation of this language policy framework, which include at a very high level the legislative frameworks, strategies and policies, enabling infrastructure and capabilities, and in particular to regulations 39 of the document that refers to the establishment and strengthening of centers for language development in order to foster collaborative programs and collaboration in general. And also to Regulation 42, which talks about the resources and the capacity development, in particular the establishment of ICT infrastructure for the development as well as the preservation of the languages in order to facilitate access and success of our students through the provision of language services such as translation and interpretation. Also, sorry, also just to again also highlight the very important requirement that came out in this particular session here around resources, and that is of funding. So my presentation will then concentrate more on the infrastructure because that is my portfolio of work and our contribution to this discussion here. So apart from the critical requirements that are necessary in terms of enabling infrastructure and capabilities, funding and legislative frameworks and so forth, the funding framework also finds itself in a very dynamic and a fast-growing environment. And we know now, I mean, it's about social media, it's about mobile apps and so forth. So probably my comment will be to say that the policy is a little bit quiet on these paradigms and really where the future is going in terms of these developments as key enablers for the implementation of the language policy. So with regards to the drivers of change and the environment, and in particular the World Wide Web and its enabling technology, resulted in an increase in communication and computational capabilities. It also produced network information, technology devices, which really changed the relationship between people and knowledge. And we know that the evolution of the internet gave rise to an increased social networking trends, development of services and community formation, as well as the democratization of access to data and information through our social media and all the platforms that's available at the moment. Secondly, and concluding, around or continuing around the discussion of this environment in which the policy finds itself, is around the shifts in the technology, again including the large the number of mobile apps, and it's been referred to as already enablers being deployed in the different universities in addressing the implementation of the strategy or the whole issue around multilingualism. And these technology shifts cannot be treated in isolation or divorced from the human and the social practices. And the explosion in the digital resources reflects a rapid actually embracing by students and lecturers and society of these new tools and new techniques for knowledge production. So it will come down to a fine balance now between these technology developments and actually the cultural and sometimes the cultural and social elements that we need to actually manage around these technology shifts. It's also about the emergence of e-research, where large-scale, multidisciplinary, and distributed global collaboration enabled by the presence of an availability of distributed cyber or e-infrastructure. There's a need actually to build appropriate sets of services and spaces for new forms of teaching, research, and learning. And this has been rudely, brought to the fore by the outbreak of COVID-19, where the system was forced to go into blended learning for teaching and training, as well as the need for actually sifting resources to support this digital imperative. So just to make sure that we have the common understanding, on the same page in terms of what we mean by research infrastructure, because not just from a scientific point of view, it is just to say that it is about facilities, resources, and services that are used by research community to conduct research, as well as foster innovation in their respective field. And it's more than just a major scientific piece of equipment or sets of equipment. It is also about knowledge-based resources. And as Professor Khumalo has cited now in his presentation and over the last day or so around the requirements. So it's about also collections, archives, scientific data. Data is even considered as an infrastructure. And then the e-infrastructure or cyber infrastructure capabilities such as data, compute, as well as communication networks and all the other tools that's necessary to conduct the research. So that provides us then with a definition to indicate that it's much broader than just the facilities that we were used to. And that brings us to the question now, why this discussion, around research infrastructure? And it brings us the answer to say that the importance of research infrastructure is actually due to its central role and as well as integral part of the so-called knowledge triangle of education, research, and innovation. And again, this triangle finds itself embedded in a much broader ecosystem of drive knowledge generation and exploitation or innovation, accelerating technology development, training of new generations of scientists and even science managers, technological and social innovation, providing capacity to address national and global challenges. And it also has the advantage, this infrastructure, of bringing actually together the best possible knowledge, human capital, and resources in one specific area. With regards to the deployment of an establishment of this infrastructure, we have adopted a sort of new approach in this regard, in the sense that the research infrastructure should actually focus on network building. And as the conversations over the last day and a half or so emphasize the importance of networking and collaboration, and really serve as engines for collaboration or collaborative efforts to build partnerships, not just in the national level, but also international at the international level. And it is within this context then that the South Africa Research Infrastructure Roadmap that Professor Khumalo already referred to was developed as a guide to strategic deployment and development, acquisition, as well as the rollout of research infrastructure, as really as a necessary and required enabler for research, development, and innovation, to address the ad hoc and siloed approach that was currently used in terms of rolling out national infrastructure. So in the next few slides, I just want to give you a little bit of a background to the South Africa Research Infrastructure Roadmap. This roadmap was developed and approved by our then minister in 2016, and it is actually underpinned by a number of principles and guidelines, and what mean that actually underpin its rollout and implementation. And to start with is to say the focus is on national research infrastructures and not necessarily international or single laboratories. It's to preserve that national character. All major economies has actually proved that research infrastructures as an essential component of the national economy. Operating national, research infrastructure must be seen as a service to the whole nation. It must be managed in a transparent and an accountable way. And open and national research infrastructures are key bargaining items in international relations, and the Square Kilometre Array Telescope is an assigning example in South Africa, where it positions South Africa as actually a serious global player in the scientific arena. And it's also when we position ourselves well now, these infrastructures can actually serve as destinations of preferred research. We must also say that the infrastructures currently on the roadmap are actually or mostly of multidisciplinary nature. They cut across different departmental boundaries, and they are long-term investments, 10 to 15-year horizons, through investments both in capital as well as operating cost, because we need also the people and these the supporting services to make sure that we have sustainable implementation of this infrastructure. And it is true that people trained at the research infrastructure, these national large infrastructure, it's a much broader perspective in the approach to research and innovation. And also for the successful implementation of these infrastructures, it's important to have very good governance in place. And then to assure the community that the current roadmap is a living document, or in general, these are living documents which needs constant updating, because we have new developments in new areas which will require updating of that. The organizing framework of the roadmap is around thematic areas and cross-cutting services and platforms. The current document is organized around 5 thematic areas. And this table shows the thematic areas: humans and society, health, biological and food and security, earth and the environment, materials and manufacturing and energy, and then 13 specific research infrastructures within that or across those thematic areas, of which the SADILAR, which was just presented, the South African Center for Digital Resource Assist, is one of the 13 research infrastructures. Up to now, since 2016, we have implemented 9 of these infrastructures at a significant investment of, close to 250 million rand per annum. And again, just on this table here, it shows that SADILAR is one of those RIs. I don't want to spend too much time on SADILAR, because it was, in detail described by Professor Khumalo as one of the RIs on the South Africa Research Infrastructure Roadmap. However, it is an important case study and within the SARIR project, as well as indicated an important infrastructure that can make a contribution in this conversation that we have now here. Just again, to emphasize that it is a distributed infrastructure, and why I'm showing this again here is again to emphasize the natural character and in terms of our requirements for these infrastructures. It cannot be single sited laboratories or in one location. It must really speak into the national collaboration, and that's why SADILAR is doing well in terms of this, as shown in the slide and as already alluded to. This again to emphasize the main pillars of this infrastructure in the area of human language, technology and resource development, as well as the digital humanities. And as Prof. Khumalo indicated, they can be proud themselves because they have the only chair in digital humanities in the country, and using now that capability to really grow that field across the country. From a DSI perspective, we have also the requirement in the rollout of the roadmap is that these infrastructures must be impactful. It's not business as usual. It cannot just perpetuate the classical outputs, but it must be impactful in terms of social and economic input. And again, SADiLaR has positioned them well in the short period of implementation in providing the building blocks for current as well as future innovations. And examples which they demonstrated in terms of impact is the development of the COVID terms in all the official languages. And that was important because for people to participate in the conversations around COVID, this project was a very important one. Another one to cite is the AWESA COVID-19 application, where they use speech technology to assist in the COVID triage and screening. So again, this was a collaborative effort between the partners, as already cited on the previous slide. We also put the requirements on these RIs to contribute to not just be impactful, but also contribute to transformation. And I can again say, from the assessment of SADiLaR as one of the RIs, is that they responded well to that in terms of using the digital humanities program as to foster transdisciplinary collaboration, as well as the digitization program, which support the sub-African language. And in my opinion, digitization is going to be a key element in terms of the implementation of the framework, in terms of digitization of the different services to make the languages more accessible and really ensure the success of delivery to the students. So to summarize now, actually the role of SADiLaR within the broader context of the South Africa Research Infrastructure Roadmap, as well as the national system of innovation, is to say that and it's already been highlighted through the previous presentation, the value of contributing to the implementation of the language policy, not as a single entity per se, but really as part of a broader system, a broader ecosystem with the partners it already has on board, but other institutions and entities, as well as the work that's galvanizing and bring on board the efforts that's already been implemented at the university level. And it will require the structuring, the preservation of the data. It will require the establishment of these infrastructures and services through the different entities and groupings, as well as exploiting the emerging technologies such as the natural language processing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that will be key to develop this very complex environment in which we find ourselves in terms of multilingualism. And then deploy this in a collective way, the data, the capabilities, as well as the emerging technologies, then respond to a number of application areas as indicated here, which will then be important for the implementation of the policy. What I want to do just next, and I hope that I'm still in time, is just to give you
unfortunately, Dr. Adams, we're out of time, but maybe just to wrap up your presentation, because I'm a bit concerned about our next session starting. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
I will wrap up now. Thank you. Is just to give reference to the other enabling environment in terms of the cyber infrastructure requirements. You know that we have the SUNREN, which is important for transmission of data and collaboration across the country, and the universities being the beneficiaries to that, and also the services it provides. we're also mindful that it's not just about the infrastructure, but also the capacities around it, and therefore a key pillar in the e-science area is the structured masters program that we roll out to develop e-skills in this area. There's a huge, I mean, there's actually a scarce skills in terms of computational skills in the area of the languages, and we have, I mean, the capability can be provided through the National Institute for Computation and Theoretical Sciences. We just want to, I mean, this slide just shows that the capabilities in the country has already been deployed in an impactful way by, for example, last year, the spatial mapping that was done through CHPC and NICIS. Currently, I mean, the policy, the National Policy Data Observatory work that's been done, which makes it possible that these capabilities will not just be responded in terms of infrastructure, but even at the policy level can make a contribution in providing evidence-based decision-making. So in conclusion, colleagues, and sorry for me running out of time here, is just again to emphasize the need for infrastructure capabilities. And we emphasize and just echo again, but the previous presentation in terms of role that SADILIA could play in this regard. The university sector is the main beneficiary of the policy, and therefore, as Dr. Thandi indicated, that will be a joint funding model will need to be will be required in order to respond to that. And lastly, is to say that this framework policy is also well placed because it aligns also with the DSI's transformation work, which includes a language transformation dimension. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to be part of this very important event. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams. And all that's left for me is to say thanks so much to all our speakers in this session, Prof. Ramjugunath for his introductory remarks, Dr. Lewin, Professor Khumalo, and Dr. Adams. All the participants, we've been catching all your questions, and I think you've already got some responses as well. So, and we'll of course also have a feedback session a little bit later after lunch. So hopefully more of the questions and feedback can come in that session as well. So with that, I would like to hand over to Professor Mabizela, who will be chairing the next session, Teaching and Learning Strategy. Over to you, Prof. Mabizela.
Thank you very much, Dr. van der Merwe, and thank you to all the presenters in this session, which has just ended. We have two presenters in this session. I'll introduce the first one, and then after her presentation, move on to the second one. Professor Bongi, who is based, Bongi Bangeni, who is based at the Center for Higher Education Development at the University of Cape Town, and is the Deputy Director, Literacies Unit in the Academic Development Program. Professor Bangeni will address us on introducing multilingual pedagogies to improve student success. Colleagues, I just wish to draw your attention to their fuller biographical information contained in the program. Let me hand over to you, Bongi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mabizela. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Indeed, indeed.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm hoping that I'll be able to share my presentation. I've tried. It didn't look so hopeful, but hopefully it will work. Professor Mabizela has already said where I'm from. I would like to just give a bit of context in terms of my presence here today. I am the current acting chair of UCT's Senate Language Policy Committee. I took over from Professor Mbulu Madiba when he left UCT for Stellenbosch, and I've been working in that capacity ever since then. I've been asked by the DVC for Teaching and Learning, Professor Liz Lange, to come and address the colloquium today. In my capacity as the acting chair, she's asked us to outline some of the mapping work that we have done in the institution, and to showcase some of the products of the findings that we have. So what I'll be doing today is to share some of the work that's been done by actually getting you to listen to staff members outline the multilingual pedagogies that they use in their lectures. So I think it's quite important to actually hear from the people who are doing the work on the ground, this very important work of carrying forward our promotion of African languages. Yesterday, Professor Pakeng gave a very comprehensive overview of some of these interventions, projects, national projects that UCT is involved in, but also collaborations within the institution. She also gave an overview of multilingual pedagogies and the work within courses. So I think she provided, therefore, a very good foundation for me today in terms of what I want to show. So I will be sharing 5 short clips of staff members outlining their various multilingual pedagogies within different learning contexts. Yesterday's speaker, I think it was Professor Bauer, highlighted the importance of also looking at promoting African languages within research contexts, sensitizing students to the values of African languages for research. So while we're looking at supporting students and providing access to disciplinary discourses drawing on African languages, I think it's important that we also show how African languages can be harnessed for research as well as for assessment. So the clips that I will share will address how staff members at UCT are drawing on African languages for various purposes, which have been highlighted in yesterday and today's sessions. Okay, so let me, Prof, can you see my presentation?
No, we can't see it yet.
Not yet. Okay, so let me go back to Teams. Okay, so let me share content. Can you see it now?
No, it hasn't shown yet.
Okay, so that was my worry in terms of okay.
That's okay, take your time.
Okay, let me bring it up. Hopefully it will now show. Then go back to the window. Okay, so this is where we at. Let me go. Okay, so she's asking me to share, but it's quite a big presentation. I'm just worried about not being able to.
I see. Yeah.
Nothing still.
Nothing is showing yet, Bongi.
Okay, right. Let me.
Bongi, can you maybe start try sharing your screen instead of sharing the window? Sometimes the window gives problems, but the screen. So instead of sharing your screens window, share the screen. There we go. Now we see your whole screen. So be careful what's on your screen.
Okay.
It's the PowerPoint, but it's showing now.
All right. So is it showing now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
It is showing, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Prof, for keeping my nerves under control. Okay, so here goes. So basically, just to start off by giving an overview of language policy at the University of Cape Town, just to highlight the important work that has been done in responding to the 2002 DHEAD framework, and also then how that has laid the foundation for the important work that is happening now. So just in terms of UCT recognizes English to be the primary medium of teaching and examination, of course, except in language and literature departments where other languages are taught and used, so like African language departments. But of course, a very important aspect of our policy is that it values indigenous African languages, isiXhosa and Afrikaans as regional languages in the Western Cape for the classroom and other public spaces within the institution. Now, just to quickly unpack the status of English as a primary language, the notion of primary language for us has been quite liberating in terms of opening up spaces for the use of South Africa's other official languages for teaching and learning alongside English. So just to give a very brief overview of some of the outputs from the language policy committee to show how UCT has responded to the DHET mandate for promoting African languages, and how we are hoping to carry this work forward now in terms of looking at the revised language policy framework. Okay, so the first one, and this work, just to emphasize this work, these outputs were led by Professor Mbulu Madiba. He did a very good job of laying a good foundation for UCT, and we are therefore picking on that work and taking that work forward. So this is very important to acknowledge. So the first one is an accent video which the Language Policy Committee put together in 2008 called Are You Judging? And what this film focused on was the issue of accent discrimination at UCT. It came up a lot amongst staff members who don't speak English as a first language, and the kinds of discrimination that they encounter from students within their teaching context. So what the Language Policy Committee did was to try and sensitize the UCT community to the fact that as educators, we come with different accents, and that accent discrimination is real, but also to sensitize staff to unconscious bias around hearing accents which they might think fall outside of the norm. So this was a very successful project, actually, in that students appreciated it, staff appreciated it, and people were able to question their own unconscious biases towards this. And of course, we got very good feedback from the UCT community about this, with people saying they're very happy that this project was able to happen. We have the institution's language implementation plan, which again was led by Professor Madiba together with members of CHED, where they came together and in consultation with key stakeholders within the institution, came up with this. So the implementation plan as it stands did get a provisional the go-ahead from Senate, but now it will need to be revised in order to align with the revised language policy framework. And of course, taking into account new aspects of this revised framework, such as the monitoring and evaluation aspect, the fact that there is now funding that will be available to institutions. So this is important work that the Language Policy Committee is going to do. The Language Policy Committee also, again, led by Professor Madiba, conducted a survey on language attitudes, where we asked students at UCT to comment on English as the language of learning, but also importantly, the role of African languages for learning and how students saw this, how they perceived this, what they thought about this. So that's a very important document that we have that will take us forward. And of course, a very recent one is a briefing document that we put together for faculties. And what it does basically is it outlines the rationale for the revision of UCT's language policy. So it's kind of a heads up to faculties to say, look, this process is coming forward. We are now currently in the process of looking at this, and we are consulting key stakeholders such as the faculties themselves, the deaneries, and so forth. But very importantly, we're also alerting them to the support that we will give as the multilingualism education project that is within CHED, but also to alert them to aspects of the framework, as I mentioned before, the M&E aspect, where faculties will need to report on their plans annually, so that faculties are aware of this. And lastly, just to end off with this particular part, we are now in the process of revising our 2013 language policy to align with the principles in the 2020 language policy framework. Okay, so just to quickly unpack Access and Success and what it means, and hopefully it will be reflected in these video clips. UCT's approach to the agenda of promoting African languages, of course, it acknowledges that students need to be given access to English, but we want to actually take that forward in terms of talking about that alongside furthering the agenda of intellectualizing African languages for research and scholarship. As I mentioned before, very important that we don't overlook this important objective of looking at how scholarship and research can be enriched and strengthened by drawing on African languages and what students bring to the classroom. So we want to look at Access and Success. When we talk about improving student success, we want to look at it in this twofold manner, that it's important to provide access to the discipline, but very importantly, how can we legitimize what the students bring? So it's not just about English, but also about unpacking students' linguistic repertoires and mirroring the importance of those languages back at them in classroom teaching and learning contexts. So a key objective, of course, is to promote access to disciplinary knowledge, as well as furthering the agenda of intellectualization of African languages for research and teaching. And so the teaching and learning interventions that we present here in these videos respond to this mandate through the various multilingual pedagogies that staff will be outlining. Okay, so I will be looking at humanities faculties, the health sciences, from a number of departments within the humanities. The first one, apologies, you won't be able to see the faces, but very importantly, you will hear the voices.
Molo Polly, if you can just introduce yourself to us.
Molo Kero, igama lami nguXolisa Kuzula. I am in the Language and Literacy Studies stream at the University of Cape Town in the School of Education, Faculty of Humanities.
Thanks very much. Polly, can you just tell us a bit about the strategies that you are using to teach multilingually in your foundation phase teacher education course?
The first thing that I do is that I get the students to surface their own linguistic repertoires, because they come from different backgrounds and speak different languages and have different linguistic resources and repertoires that they bring. So I do a table that gets them to think about what languages they speak, what they understand, read, write, and they populate that table. In that sense, they start to see themselves as speaking a variety of languages, as well as non-formal varieties of language that they use. And then I also focus on the similarities between languages. And so we look at words that are similar in each language, like chocolate, pepper, like the different items that they know, like iketile, teaspoon, to see where the words are coming from, what the roots of the words are, so that they start developing an ear for hearing the different repertoires that their learners bring in their classrooms. And then, of course, stories and rhymes and games and music is what foundation phase teachers focus in language and literacy learning. And so by using rhymes and songs, for example, we start building the teachers' repertoire of the different resources that children can draw on in their classrooms, like songs like Umziwacha can be sung in English and Afrikaans, House is Burning, Haste Brand, Dagwe to Father Jacob, Are You Sleeping? And they do those kind of multilingual rhymes and songs. And last year they also did puppet shows where they had to make their puppet box, and then they had to make it speak in different languages. Sometimes some separate in different languages, like they would sing a rhyme in two languages separately. Some will be creatively putting the two rhymes together as in one linguistic repertoire.
Right.
So those are some strategies, yeah.
Thank you very, very much. It sounds really exciting.
Thank you.
Dumelang Bahaeso. I am Dr. Madumo Ramafike from the Division of Occupational Therapy in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Cape Town. I am here to share with you a snippet of the work that I do with multilingualism in the classroom. In occupational therapy, we have academic support tutorials for students that are at risk of failing. And majority of the students that are referred for this support are multilingual students. So in this space, using translanguaging as a lens, I draw on the students and my multilingual resources to engage with critical dialogue about occupational therapy constructs. How this is done is that when students indicate a challenge in understanding a particular concept or a theory in occupational therapy, we discuss the theory in their home languages or any other multilingual resource that they have at their disposal. This enables students to engage much more actively in their learning. It ensures understanding of concepts. It creates a sense of belonging for these students who often feel alienated in higher education. This also changes perception and shifts ideologies about multilingualism and the positioning of languages other than English and Afrikaans in higher education. The benefits of this is that students are able to demonstrate their understanding while educating others and gaining confidence in their knowledge of occupational therapy concepts. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I think that this particular one doesn't want to play. Sorry, am I still sharing, Prof?
Yes, but there is nothing showing at the moment. You can just proceed.
Okay, all right. Let me stop sharing and then start sharing again. I think this particular video would be such a pity because it's on assessment. But let's see where I can take this next one.
Right.
Um,
We can see your screen. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Can you see now? I just need to do the slide.
This seems to be the first slide.
Okay, all right, yes. I want to take us to that.
Okay.
Okay, let's see whether that will play now.
Hi everybody, so this is just a quick video to explain what we do in the Humanities EDU by way of multilingual pedagogies. So my name's Ellen Hurst and Hi everybody, so this is just a quick video to explain what we do in the Humanities EDU by way of multilingual pedagogies. So my name's Ellen Hurst and I'm going to be talking about my course and also a course of my colleague Shannon Moreira. So we have these two courses, DOH 1009S, Concepts in the Social Sciences, that's the course that Shannon Moreira works with, and then DOH 1010S, Text in the Humanities, that's the course that I work with. We convene those two courses. They're both introductory courses for the 4-year degrees. So Text in the Humanities, my course, is aimed at the BA, and DOH 1009 Concepts is aimed at the BSOC Sci students who are on the 4-year degree program, and they do it in their first year when they join the unit. So early on when we were teaching these DOH courses, they started I think in 2013, and quite early on we started to embed some multilingual pedagogies into these courses. So I worked with what I call language histories, and Shannon worked with multilingual glossaries.
So the language histories was an essay which we asked students to reflect on their personal history and the languages that they've used and encountered in their home, schoolwork, and so on. And these essays, they used to do them as their first essay, and we asked them to write them in whatever language or mixture of languages they wanted to. And what would often emerge from these essays was extremely multilingual stories, and then stories about their lives and how they transitioned between places, between schools, and at the same time between languages. So, for example, from lower school to high school, and the language shifts that required, or perhaps they moved to be closer to a particular school, and the language shifts that required. So there are a lot of these sort of life transitions described in the essays. And then there were discourses that emerged about language in South Africa. So the way that English was often talked about was in terms of like and enjoyment, and but African languages garnered love and pride. So there were different discourses emerged relating to the different languages that they spoke about. The essays also provide us with some level of sort of numeric or quantitative representation of multilingualism within our cohorts. And what we found was that these language histories really help to surface and validate students' linguistic capital that they bring with them to the university space. Where usually it would be sort of, it would become second to English in a lot of the spaces at UCT. So we use them to validate their own linguistic capital. Then Shannon worked with multilingual glossaries on the concepts course. So she used these glossaries to introduce concepts in the social sciences. The students were given a list of key concepts. So some examples there, socialization and so on. And in computer lab sessions, this was back in the face-to-face days, students were required to provide definitions for the key concepts in their language of choice. And they talked to one another in groups, they defined key concepts in various different languages, and then they were also introduced to an online wiki where they were able to see each other's definitions of concepts and comment on them or add to them. So students engaged in lengthy multilingual debates while coming up with concepts. So learning was active and it was in their own language. And they often responded that their language doesn't have a word for this, so they were forced to find linguistically and culturally appropriate idioms for social science concepts. From those sort of early forays into multilingual pedagogies, then we moved into assessment, looking at basically we both told our students they could submit all their essays and assignments in any language they wanted to, or any mixture of language. So our courses are now 100% coursework, and they still can submit their essays and assignments in any language. We found reactions to this often are, oh, well, how do you mark them? But we're lucky enough to have extremely excellent tutors here at UCT. So we draw on our tutors' multilingualism, and we, to a certain extent, if it's just sort of a few sentences, often might get embedded. You can use Google Scholar if necessary. We both understand a little bit of African languages, and although I don't speak African languages, and a little bit of Afrikaans. So there's ways to work around and to be able to engage with the texts and to mark them. Our tutors are an extremely important resource for this as well. And then online resources in what used to be the labs, now in lessons in the Vula online courses. Often I draw on multilingual texts. I use multilingual texts and for discussion in the course. And then also we've been translating online resources or lesson plans into isiXhosa and Afrikaans where appropriate. So a lot of the actual kind of course content online is translated. The online mode, the shift into online, has seemed to lead in both our courses to less translanguaging essays and submissions. So there's this sort of English dominance to the online mode that's quite difficult. We think the loss of classroom spaces and the ability to encourage students or to demonstrate multilingual practices in the classroom. It's also hard on encouraging students to use multilingual resources in their submissions. So one thing we're doing now is translating the assignment instructions into isiXhosa to try to encourage more multilingualism in submissions. And just finally, one other thing that we're doing, we've been doing for several years is unit research into multilingual pedagogies. There have been various reflections on the pedagogies that I've just described in some publications there. And then there was a project called Ukukuba-Wimi, which we applied systemic functional linguistics to understand translanguaging in the essays, the language histories. And then I'm currently involved in a project with Msako Mona from University of Limpopo on African language speaking students' variation when writing in English. So we're looking at how tutors particularly provide feedback on so-called errors and how these errors are actually variation relating to students' first languages. So that's some of the stuff that we've been working on in terms of research in this area as well. Thanks for the interest, and see you soon.
At the History Access program in the Department of Historical Studies, one of our key priorities is encouraging and equipping our research students to conduct original historical research in the archives of historically disadvantaged and institutionally marginalized Southern African languages. Through a limited number of scholarships, from honors to the postdoctoral level, we attract and support projects that dare to step out of European and European-derived language sources to reimagine the history of Southern Africa. Currently, we are in the 4th year of this Mellon Foundation-supported 5-year program, and over all these years, we have consistently worked on creating a very carefully customized, intensive, weekly series of historical Nguni languages workshops. Every week of the academic year, our young researchers meet for 3 hours, sometimes with invited guests, to conduct semi-structured critical discussions of the connected histories and grammatical structures of the different Nguni languages that they are working with, and to identify, elaborate, and complicate concepts from these languages with a view to productively deploying them in academic histories. These workshops flow into 2 full-fledged graduate conferences every year, where we also invite leading scholars in the country and abroad to present their own works in the field and to provide feedback on our students. Throughout the year, a number of related activities, including making short podcasts based on their original research and creating Wikipedia entries for Southern African languages, continue, depending on particular students' interests and talents. A multilingual project of this kind necessitates constant interaction between participants, regular conversation across boundaries of specialization, and the spirit of both conceptual and linguistic translation. Of great significance is the nature of pedagogical engagement, where the first language speakers take the lead in discussions, inverting the usual dynamics of postgraduate interaction. The emphasis is decidedly on the process rather than the product, but we are also committed to producing a critical multilingual conceptual lexicon at the end of our project, containing the collective research work of our students and staff that will be peer-reviewed and made available to the general public free of cost. The process of integrating some of this work into our undergraduate and postgraduate courses has already started.
And last but not least,
Really?
Bongi, I'm
almost done, Prof. Last slide.
My name is Atabile Bosa from African Languages and Literatures at University of Cape Town. I'm the head of section there. I'm going to share with you how I use multilingualism in one of my courses, which is cross-cultural communication. This course is a variety of students from Africa and abroad. And what we do in this course, we give students an opportunity to share using their own language. This is an interactive communication and culture in African languages. Whereas the main focus is on South African indigenous languages. Classroom activities require students to draw from their own experiences to understand cross-cultural communication. So we use content that engages the diversity of students' lives well and is cognizant of our African vocation. So we employ innovative teaching and delivery methods, including multilingual pedagogies and interliteracy, which allow more time for active engagement and development of critical reading and writing skills. So what we do is there's a lot of engagement through students because they can express their views using their own mother tongue language. And my expertise of knowing all the Sotho groups and then the Nguni, usually the translation becomes easy if students want to express themselves, but they are trying to find that right word. I always come in. And others also who speak the same language would support whatever the translation or explanation that has been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm done, Prof. Just to conclude, okay, so these videos have shown ongoing work within departments, and they address the key areas that are foregrounded before, facilitating access to concepts in courses, legitimizing African languages for teaching and learning, exploring possibilities for multilingualism for assessment, and harnessing the affordances of African languages for research. So the revised 2020 language policy framework provides us at UCT with opportunities to continue this work and for faculties to revisit or develop their language plans and to incorporate monitoring and evaluation initiatives that are very important in this revised framework. Finally, I'd like to thank members of the Senate Language Policy Committee and members of the Language Policy Task Team. I'd like to thank Professor Mbulu Madiba for the work that he's provided in laying this foundation. And I would also like to thank Professor Emeritus Derek Hellenberg, who continues to advise us on the Language Policy Committee. And lastly, to all the staff members who have shared their multilingual pedagogies with us today. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you very much, Bongi. I'm terribly sorry for rushing you, but we have hopelessly run out of time. There's another session that starts at 12:45. We still have one speaker. May I invite Professor Sandile Songa, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor Teaching and Learning at UKZN, to address us. Professor Songa. As I've indicated, there's a plenary session which starts at 12:45. Professor Songa, are you there? Pinda? Does anyone know if Professor Songa is on board? Hello?
I will check for you, Prof. Let me just check quickly.
If he is not, then we'll just have to take a short adjournment for lunch.
Vicky, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
He doesn't seem to be on the platform here.
Okay, so I'm afraid we'll just have to take this late lunch, and I should remind you that the next plenary session will start at 12:45. Thank you to all, to the presenters, and thanks, Bongi, for sharing really exciting work done at UCT. Thank you very much, colleagues, and I must apologize for taking long, and thanks for your understanding and forbearance. Session ended.